Thank you, everybody, for joining me this afternoon or this evening or whatever it may be for wherever you are. Thank you for joining us on TokYo-Yo Talk. My name is T, and today I am joined by Mike Montgomery of, I want to make sure I pronounce this correctly. It's Burgeon, right?
Burgeon. Well, at least that's how I pronounce it.
Okay. I looked it up before and I saw two pronunciations. So Burgeon Yoyos, right?
Yeah,
Okay, great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. It's actually 11:30 where I'm at over here in Idaho, but I'm doing pretty good. This is my normal time for functioning.
You tend to have a lot of late nights?
Yeah, I've got two kids, and it's pretty much the only time where they're both asleep and the wife's down, and I can focus on working on my company or even just sitting down and watching Netflix for a while.
Mm. Cool. Well, in the vein of talking about your family and your business and stuff, if
hmm
someone, you know, very, very sadly doesn't know who you are but listens to my stuff, do you think you could tell us about yourself and your company?
Yeah, so Um, my name's Michael Montgomery. I guess you already know that part.
Hmm.
I've been yo-yoing since 2003. I was 13 when I first picked up a yo-yo. I'd seen this guy at a summer camp waiting to pick up his kids, and he was playing with a yo-yo, and I thought it was cool, so I went over and started harassing him about learning yo-yo tricks. And it turned out that he had a yo-yo club that met every other Sunday at a church about an hour from my house. And so with a little bit of begging, my mom bought me my first Duncan Dragonfly, and I started going to this guy's meetup. And his name's Gary Reinbold, by the way. He's a pretty influential local yo-yoer. He's like the catalyst that causes all the yo-yoers from Idaho to happen.
Hmm.
um, but yeah, I got started from his organization every other Sunday when I was little, and then got my friends into it a little bit here and there. Um, Went throughout high school, and I was known as the yo-yo guy all throughout high school. I got in the newspaper a few times for it, and it was really the way that I kind of identified myself. Like, some people think of themselves as a skateboarder or a computer programmer. I've always thought of myself as a yo-yoer. I have interest in computers. I've always been fascinated by technology. I used to develop websites for a living, and now I have them and I can maintenance them if I ever need to. I have a wife named Danielle. We've been married for just about 2 years at this point. We have a son named Weston. He's 2 years old, and we have a daughter named Willow, who's about 4.5 months old now.
Mm.
So we're still in that waking up 4 times a night phase, which is pretty fun.
Mm-hmm.
Gives me excuses to go and check comments on YouTube videos and catch up on what everyone else has been posting. There's a lot of yo-yoers on YouTube these days.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of like the quick and dirty who I am. Most of my life revolves around my family these days, and maybe the 5 to 20 minutes of yo-yoing I can get in here and there. So that's pretty much who I am at the moment.
Mm. Cool. And you mentioned your company before, and I'm sure
Mhm.
anyone who's listening to this knows about it, but Burgeon Yoyos, can you tell us about that too?
So Burgeon Yoyos started out as the Montgomery Yo-Yo Company. I'd been kicking around the idea to have a yo-yo company for several years, um, and a couple of, I think it was a year and a half ago when Monkey Finger Design and I separated. I had decided, you know what, this is the time. I've never really been the kind of person that's able to work for someone else or do. Basically, I want to be in charge of whatever it is I'm involved in. It's just kind of how I work. And I figured, you know what, this is my time to try it. I'm going to start the company. And I approached my YouTube audience about this thing I wanted to do. I wanted to get a yo-yo made. And we fundraised, I think it was about $600 to get a prototype made for that aluminum yo-yo I've been posting pictures and trick circles of on Instagram called the Sprout.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Over time, I realized how hard it is to get an aluminum yo-yo manufactured that sort of fits what everybody likes in the yo-yo world. Like, nobody wants even the most minute amount of vibe on a yo-yo,
Mm.
especially if you're going to call it a premium one. And all the places that I approached here locally for machining just couldn't handle making the yo-yo without any vibe. Like, every prototype I got had just even that smallest amount of fingernail vibe, and it's hard for me to allow that kind of thing. Like, I can play it just fine, and I think that's probably just my 14 years of experience under my belt, where I just don't care about vibe and I just get into playing the yo-yo. But I know that everybody else, or at least as far as you can tell from comments online, everybody else is very strict about vibe. So I was trying to find a way where I could still have a yo-yo company and sort of be in control of the manufacturing so I could control quality. And I'd always been interested in woodworking, and I'd been watching hundreds, if not thousands, of woodworking videos on YouTube. It was just kind of always fascinating for me to look at. And so I decided, you know what? I've got this lathe that my father-in-law bought me for Christmas last year that I haven't touched in forever. Let's figure out how to use it and see if I can make a decent yo-yo on it. So the first yo-yo I made on it, I ended up calling the Roots because somewhere along the way before this, I changed the name of the company to Burgeon because I liked the idea of something growing organically and quickly. And the first yo-yo, the aluminum one, was going to be called the Sprout because it was like the first yo-yo. It was the beginning of the growth of the Burgeon. And so I figured, since I'm going to be putting the Sprout on hold, the thing that's going to come before the Sprout is the Roots. So I ended up naming my first wooden yo-yo the Roots because it was something that I could make myself and control, and a good firm foundation or a good strong roots underneath this tree that is going to be my company would allow it to have a more successful future. So I've always, I don't know if it's unique to me or if everybody thinks this way, but I always try to put symbolism into the things that I do because it's kind of my way of showing the world, look, I put some thought into this and not just, I made this up and I decided to try and make a buck off of it. And so, yeah, the Roots it was the first one, and it's an interesting concept to me, at least, because generally when a company releases a yo-yo, it's one solid design. They might make a couple of runs of it, and then everybody gets tired of it, the hype dies, and they move on to the next thing. And I've hated that. I don't like that way of operating business, and even if that's the way you have to do it to succeed, it's not the way I want to do it. So I am more inclined to say every time I make another run of Roots, since I can only really make about 10 at a time, and I'm getting better every time I make them, I try to incorporate improvements into each run. So every time I release them, there might be no update to the design at all, or there might be a major update or just minor changes here and there, but I always try to make each run a little bit better than the last. And to make it kind of interesting, I manually wood burn the company logo into it, which I'd like to eventually buy a branding iron for that part because I'm very inconsistent when it comes to making the company logo. But I like signing them with the date that I finished making the batch, so that if anyone is interested in a particular type of Roots, maybe they see one from back in May of this year, or one from, I think the earliest one I have is March, or I think that's from March. But basically there's variations in the design, and if anyone was ever trying to chase one down, they could say, oh, I just want the one from March, or I want the one from July. And I like that as people are posting pictures of these things, and as I'm posting pictures of these things, at a glance you can see when it was from, and you can sort of see the level of quality that was coming out at that time. It's kind of like a snapshot of my company and the quality we can produce at that time, and it's a way to tell the story of this as it develops, and it makes it, at least for me, more real. Like, I've always had issues disassociating myself with the world, and everything feels fake for a while, and starting this company and making a physical product and doing it all by hand and doing it myself has really helped me come back into the reality of this life that we have going on. And signing them all by hand and dating them, it just sort of helps me, I don't know, stay in line with, this is actually happening. I actually have a company. There's actually products here. There's actually people buying them, and they're going all over the country, and eventually I'll allow international shipping, and they'll go all over the world. So sorry if that was excessively long, but
No.
it's just kind of where Burgeon is at the moment. And I sort of stole this philosophy, but I like it a lot. And it's that you should do what you can with what you have. You shouldn't, like, I put up a roadblock when it came to the Sprout. I stopped working on it for several months because there was nothing that I could do to make it flawless, and I couldn't release a product that wasn't flawless. And then I was reading. I've always been into the self-help books. Like I read a lot of those making your life better books, and they always have this one key theme, and it's that the people that are successful are the ones that do anything they possibly can to move forward, even if it's the smallest thing they can do. And I realized that I wasn't doing anything, and started thinking, well, what can I do to move forward? And I realized, you know what, I've got this lathe in the basement, and I've got some wood in the garage. Let's make a yo-yo. Like, I always try to find the next step forward, even if it's just a small one.
Excellent. Wow. Thank you. Fantastic answer.
Thank you.
It's been interesting to see, your journey from following your channel. I got into it probably a year or two ago, and I went back pretty far into the older tutorials and stuff, and then it was fun to watch. I believe it was Living Off Autopilot.
Yeah, that was one of those things. That was basically around the time where I read that book, where I was like, I need to be more aware of my day-to-day existence.
Right.
And that was kind of a way for me to practice that. I ended up stopping doing it. I've been recording sporadically here and there and putting vlogs up here and there. I'd like to get back to daily, but I've gotten obsessed with quality of the videos I've been putting out, and it's hard for me to put out a quality video every single day. Otherwise, if I do that, I'm going to end up staying up till like 6 in the morning every single day trying to do it. And then eventually I will collapse and won't be able to do anything.
Right. But yeah, it's been really, I think there's a lot of variety in your content, and it's been fun following you and seeing, there's the reviews. And I remember, I think the first time I ever saw your content was, I think, the Skyva review. And that was interesting because it actually was a big inspiration for what I started doing. Like, I was like, oh, there can be like more long form, more thoughtful analysis of every aspect of a yo-yo. It doesn't have to be, because I'm not good enough to do like a trick circle, like, that people are going to care about. But I can certainly talk about something that I like.
Definitely.
And I was really inspired by, you went into every aspect of stuff, but then after that it became more, like you said, the daily vlogs, and then you started getting into the company. So it's been really, really interesting to see the progression, I think.
It's funny that you mentioned the long form content. It's like the people that watch the video seem to love it, and then all the people, like I used to be pretty active in the R Throwers Reddit group, and when I posted on there, people were like, 20 minutes? No way, I'm not watching that. Make it shorter. And I'm like, if you just watch it, you'll like it, I swear. But there's some people that no matter what, they just want a bite-sized piece of content, and I can respect that now that I'm so busy. If it's not podcast form and I can't be washing the dishes while I'm listening to it, it's hard for me to consume content these days. So I can definitely see where those people were coming from, but when it comes to like putting my thoughts out there, I'm not good at writing things down and forming like a cohesive thought from it. I can't just make a rough draft and then polish it 50 times until I have a final paper. It's like I have to set up the camera and just talk for an hour and then trim it down to the best bits. That's how I start my rough draft and get my polished paper. So that's kind of why I always end up with long form content.
That's certainly something I enjoy, like that they said the bite-sized stuff is fine, and there are actually people doing that now. You've got like Sam Hicks' channel is pretty short stuff. Speaking in that, you've got like Lorenzo Cubing, who does very, very short videos, reviews and stuff like that. So I think there's kind of something for everybody now.
Definitely.
Nice. So you kind of mentioned that you started with the Sprout and you got into Roots after that.
Well, ever since I was young, whenever it came to big projects or anything like that, I've gotten really good at breaking them down just into their individual parts, kind of like a puzzle. And so even when it came to like making the yo-yo, it wasn't this like a big price tag that I was looking at. It wasn't the hundreds of hours of design I was looking at. It was what are the steps I need to take to get to the end? And so for the yo-yo, it was, well, I need to find a machine shop. So that was just like 20 minutes on Google. And then it was, I need to have a design. And so I spent a few hours here and there for a couple of weeks on it was a Photoshop app on my cell phone. I had a Note, I think it was like a Note 3 at the time. So I would just doodle on there until I ended up with the sprout design. And once I finally got that, it was, okay, the next step is I need to have this in a CNC ready file. So I figured, why not just reach out to the machine shop that's local and see if they would be willing to digitize it for me. And for $100 an hour they were. So I ended up sitting down with them, and it took 2 hours. So I paid them $200 to make a file for me. And then the next step was getting the price quote, and they ended up quoting me, I think it was, if I got 3 prototypes, $100 each. So next step was to raise $300, and I did my fundraiser online. That brought in the money to cover the CAD as well as the prototyping, and like it wasn't ever this massive thing for me. It wasn't I'm climbing Everest. It was I'm just going to the next mile marker. So if I try to think of it in the other way, my anxiety kicks in and I freak out and curl into the ball and don't get anything done. But if I'm only looking at what's my next step or what's the next thing to get me closer to the result that I'm trying for, that's what makes it more possible. And I think that's why this sprout ended up getting put on hold, is I can't really find the next step locally. And it was very important for me to either be able to work locally or to do it myself. And the 2 shops that are here local want the same amount of money for the project, and they also haven't been able to get the project into the correct tolerances where it doesn't have vibe. So it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, so is the next step continuing this project, or is the next step to learn that maybe this just needs to be put on hold until I'm able to hit the quality and find a different next step to keep things rolling?
So always forward.
Yes.
All right. And then speaking of what you did after that, the Roots project, I was actually lucky enough, a fan of the show, of the channel, Tie Dye Sky, was kind enough to send me a Roots that he had.
Really?
Yeah, I played some fixed axle when I was younger, but he asked me, "Did you have one? I'd like to send you a Roots." I was like, "No, please do." And so I actually just received it, I think 2 days ago.
Awesome.
And
Which one did you end up getting?
See, I've got the company logo on it, and there's a number here at the top, but it's a little hard to see. It looks like 1.5 old. It's hard to see.
So 017.
Might be. Oh, I was looking at it upside down. Duh. Oh my God, I'm an idiot. Okay. So it looks like July 3rd, 2017.
That's awesome. That's actually a skinnier model. That was when I had finally gotten some polishing done and started rounding out the center. That was probably one of my favorite ones for kickflips.
Oh, nice.
Well, that's cool. That's probably the furthest any of them have traveled so far.
Yeah, I bet, right? I can't believe I was trying to read it. It's like, does it say 1 gold? I should have just turned it over. Oh my God. Anyway, but yeah, it's been actually a lot of fun, and it's you mentioned off the air, listening to the Dr. B interview, that this is really showing me where my inconsistencies lie in my style.
Yeah. It definitely will, I guess, shine a magnifying glass on things. Like if you have any like bumps when you're throwing just a normal sleeper, it'll smack you in the knuckles pretty hard. So it teaches you lessons almost through pain, which is interesting. And I didn't know the reason for a lot of the names of old tricks for a long time until I started trying to throw fixed axle, like laceration and suicide and all of these crazy names. And you're like, man, that's a really morbid hobby. And then you try to throw one and you're like, yeah, I understand why they called it that now, because you'd have to be crazy to throw a suicide catch.
But yeah, I've really been enjoying it. Like I've never had a proper really high quality. There's a couple of wooden yo-yos I've bought just on a
Hmm.
whim, like at a knick-knack store or something, like a dollar or $2 or something, just to say, look at this crazy thing.
Yeah.
But nothing that was produced with like quality and design and actual playability in mind. So it's been really
Hmm.
fun to play around with it.
Well, I'm glad that you've got a chance to try one. I do that too. Every time I'm in a thrift shop or an antique shop, I'm like, "Do you guys have any yo-yos?" And generally, I'll buy them because, well, they're either just gonna get sent to some warehouse somewhere and get recycled, or some kid's gonna get it and not know what to do with it and then throw it away, or it'll get lost in a closet. And I usually find some interesting ones. Like the last time I was at this antique shop, I found an old like Duncan Pro or Duncan Tournament. It's this little all have you ever seen the keychain yo-yo that Duncan sends out? It's like a little tiny imperial. It's really heavy.
No.
It's like that. It's probably just a little bit bigger than a quarter, but it's made of wood, and I assume it's twice my age because it's just really old, and the lettering's very hard to read, and just a really cool little thing. And it was sitting in a thrift shop in the middle of downtown Nampa, Idaho, and nobody would have bought it if I or another yo-yoer hadn't seen it.
Well, let's see here. I think that's pretty much all I had for just the basic questions.
Okay,
Would you like to get into the Instagram questions?
absolutely.
Got some good ones here, actually. All right, well, let's start here first with the guy who sent me your awesome yo-yo, Tie Dye Sky. And I think you kind of answered this a little bit before, but we'll just get into the pertinent part. It says your drawing skills are apparent in your wood burns. Is it natural talent, or did you study for that?
um, it was more like pretty much every skill I've picked up by trying to do things. Like with drawing, I never took any classes. I attempted to take a class in high school and I hated it because I didn't want to draw the way they were teaching. I've always been more of a scribble until it looks good kind of person, and I over time started drawing with just Bic pens, little the ballpoint pens, and I learned from doing that you kind of have to incorporate your mistakes if you want to ever finish a project. And so
Mm.
it was kind of a natural progression from that to wood burning, because if you mess up wood burning, especially on a yo-yo that you've already spent 5 hours making, it's like you're not just going to throw it away. So um, I've just picked that up from probably longer than I've been yo-yoing years of practice. I think like 15 or 16 years. Um, but yeah, I've always been drawing. It's just something I've always found fascinating, and I wish I had more time to do it. It's very therapeutic for me.
And then he asks, what direction do you see Burgeon Yoyos taking in the future?
Very hard for me to say. Like I've always had these grand dreams in my head of what I've wanted to do with the yo-yo company, and it's hard for me to decide if those are like appropriate for me to take with Burgeon, or if it's just the experience that I wanted to have as a young kid learning how to yo-yo. Like I always wanted to have like the traveling salesman like Duncan used to do,
Mm.
and to have them show up at toy stores and do little contests. Like I always wanted to do something like that. I always wanted to have a yo-yo club system based on the martial arts system where you have ranks that you can graduate through, kind of like what Duncan teased for the Boy Scouts of America convention recently,
Mm.
where they had the patches, kind of like Spin-tastics used to have.
Oh, awesome.
I I always wanted something like that, and it would just be like standardized lists of tricks that you could graduate through, and then once you were at the master level for that particular club, you would help create like a club trick. And I wanted this to be a franchise system, so you could just have them everywhere, and there would be someone in charge at every single group to make sure that it worked. And like I have it all written down. I have all these things that I'd love to do, and then working on my own yo-yos and sort of stepping back and looking at the big picture, I realized maybe I'm not the right person to do that. I love working. I love being in the basement at the lathe turning stuff. I love sitting at the desk customizing the yo-yos, but I've organized contests before. I've ran clubs before, and it was never truly an enjoyable experience for me. I know that some yo-yoers see it that way, like they love organizing the contest. They like being the event coordinator and getting the recognition from it and feeling like they've done something significant. And I definitely felt that at the time. And teaching kids in the moment, I always found a lot of enjoyment in it, but I also got so much stress from it that it was almost not worth me doing it. And I never had the leadership skills or the teaching skills to wrangle 20 to 30 young children and get them to pay attention long enough to not hit each other with the yo-yos. Like, I just wasn't the right person for a group. So it's like, do I take the steps forward for these goals, or do I accept the fact that maybe I'm just not the right person for it right now, and maybe as the company grows I can find the right person to do that? Or maybe just mentioning it now, another company will say, hey, that would be an awesome idea, we should do that. Like, if somebody would do that, this sport would have, or hobby, however you want to say it, it would have a lot more longevity. People wouldn't learn sleep or walk the dog, rock the baby, and they'd be like, well, I don't think there's anything else to learn, I'm quitting. It would be, there's a pathway for me to take, and there's a group of people for me to hang out with, and it's in person, and I get recognition as I grow through this. Like, this is the kind of stuff that as a 13, 14-year-old living in the middle of Idaho, and I was the only yo-yoer for an hour, that was the kind of stuff that I craved, that I dreamed of and I couldn't have. And so I would love for that to be in the future of my company, but it's just, how do I make that happen when I'm not the right person to do it? So that's what's been distracting me. And the actual path at the moment is keep on making the roots, keep on making them better. I'd like to make a ball-bearing wooden yo-yo because I know I'm capable of doing that.
Oh my God.
And I'd like to start using that myself. And that one will probably follow the same path as the roots, where every time I release a batch, I'll try to improve it and make it a little bit better. And like, I would prefer to be using that in my videos because that's something that I can actually make, than the Sprout prototype that everybody's like, when are you going to release this? Come on, we've been wanting to buy it. Why are you teasing us with it if you're not going to release it? And it just kind of makes me feel bad. So I'd like the next big step that I can actually do soon to be the ball bearing wooden. And I'd like it to be a type C bearing, probably flat, because I definitely agreed with what Dr. B was saying. You don't really need the concave, and it's kind of a crutch to have, and I agree with him there. It would definitely have silicone response because I want to be able to bind on it. Like, I want to have the best of the aluminum world in a wooden yo-yo, like the old Yo-Yo Jam bamboo yo-yo that was out for a very short while and then disappeared. I always thought that was fascinating.
Next one here is from ES. I always mess up his name. I'm sorry. EOS X Draws, who says, I love Mike's style. What happened to Let's Play Yo-Yo?
Let's Play Yo-Yo pretty much got put on hold and then put into this back burner mode when I met my wife. I don't know if any of you know this yet, and most of the people that complain about Let's Play Yo-Yo not coming out are in their teens. But once you share your life with another human being, putting 12 hours a day into recording a yo-yo video becomes very not okay.
Right.
So it's like, yeah, you can have an hour a day to do it. And it's like, by the time I get into the groove, get the laptop on, get the video up so I can watch what's going on for the trick I'm trying to learn, get the camera set up, get the lights set up, and I'm finally ready to start trying to learn this trick, and I get relaxed enough to have my comedy banter with the camera, I have 4 minutes left. So it's like, it's very hard for me to do right now. I definitely want to do more of it. I've been thinking, since I'm making fixed axle yo-yos, it'd be fun to tackle Ed Haponics. He has this like fixed axle challenge that he put out a few years back. I thought it'd be fun to progress my way through that, because it kind of goes hand in hand with making the fixed axles. It would help promote them, and then it would also push me as a fixie player, and it would definitely expose at least the 4,000 people that subscribe to me on YouTube to this sub-genre within our very small hobby. And I think that would be fun to try and keep Let's Play Yo-Yo alive for the moment. And then as I have more time, I'd like to get back into ball bearing tricks. Like I currently have a Zach Gormley trick on hold, and I was attempting to sort of dance around the time limits by live streaming my practice, and they were okay, but I quickly realized that I'm not that good live, and and when you do 4 episodes in a row that are about 30 minutes long and you don't progress past an element, it gets very boring for people. So it's like, okay, it definitely needs to be something where I learn it on camera behind the scenes, edit it down to just the funny bits like normal, and then post it when it's done. And maybe I just need to film those 4 minutes here and there as I have time, and understand that I'm going to edit it later and we'll eventually have this polished piece of content to put out. But because of how much time goes into it, and if you aren't posting stuff, you don't exist these days. I have to focus on what I can do now, and that's Instagram and an occasional vlog here and there. And I don't know if you saw it because it just went up this morning, but I've started recording tutorials again. I'm going to start hitting those as hard as I can, at least once a week, but I'd like to do a couple of times a week a new tutorial with decent quality, like just to stay at the forefront of people's minds and reactivate my subscriber base, and just actually sort of show some respect to the people that want content from me.
Nicholas Lotman asked, first of all, when will your medal be released? We talked about that, but what are your tips for making good-looking tricks?
So when it comes to like how I make tricks, and I've listened to other people in the podcasts answer this question, and I'm very similar to them, where it just kind of comes to me. Like I will have, kind of like Remy does, I've got 5 tricks that I've kind of just got sitting there in my mind that I'm working on. And sometimes I'll be standing in line in Walmart waiting to check out, and an element will pop into my head, and that little puzzle piece fits one of those 5 puzzles I'm working on, and I pull the yo-yo off my hip and start trying it really fast. And if it seems to work, then I'm like, hey, Danielle, can you hold my phone and record this really quick so I don't forget it? And then I get home and I run into the basement and I record it on the nice camera, and I just try to incorporate the new element. But for me, the main thing is I want my trick to look and feel smooth. I want each element, whatever element came before and whatever element comes after, to complement the one I'm doing at the moment. And that means that I don't just randomly stop for no reason and change directions. It means that if I'm going to stop and change directions, that there's a cool way to do it. Like there's I can't think of the name of the trick, but basically it would be like doing an Eli hop, and then when it comes back down, you could turn your whole body and switch into front style. Like you take advantage of a fluid motion that helps you change direction. Like you don't just go from flipping a pinwheel clockwise to stopping and flipping it counterclockwise without like having an interesting pause. It's very hard to put this kind of stuff into word. It's very easy to show it like on video, but for me it's mainly, does it flow, and can I hit it clean, and does it feel finished? And for me, I love watching like freestyles on stage. I love watching these extremely long combos on Instagram. Like the stuff people can do, the cat's cradle kind of things that you see people throwing, is always fascinating for me. And to be able to process at that level that quickly on the fly, or what I at least perceive as on the fly, is impressive. But I'm also thinking of, is this fun for me to do when I'm making my tricks? And a minute-long, flowy, slacky, techie combo isn't always impressive for me, and it isn't always fun for me. So I usually end up having a short, bite-sized trick that feels right, that flows good, and that looks good on camera, or at least looks good to an audience. I used to go to contests a lot and freestyle a lot, so a lot of that philosophy came from that. And that was back in the days where you didn't necessarily have to have a long trick to score high. You just had to have a really hard trick, and it had to be obvious that it was a hard trick. And so one of the things that I try to do is, when I'm making a trick, is, can everybody do this? If so, maybe I need to change it up a little bit. And I always try to find a way, when I'm adding an element to a trick, to do it from a different direction. Like, instead of like a trapeze, you go over the top of your index finger. Maybe I need to start it by throwing it and letting it hang above my finger, fall underneath, and mount it underneath like a bottom mount. And then throw some slack, and then mount it over to the other side and do like a Yuki slack thing. Like, I just try to find a way for it to flow and to look good and feel right. And like, I could talk about this forever and never really give you a good, solid, concrete answer, but that's my attempt to try.
YoJTP3, who says, part of this I might need some clarification on, I'm not sure, but the first question is, what would you consider the best yo-yo right now?
That one, I have the cheeky, sarcastic answer of whatever yo-yo's in my hand. Because, like, a yo-yo is worthless without the yo-yoer. It's just a cool piece of aluminum, plastic, or wood that's gathering dust on a shelf or in a box until somebody puts it on their hand and turns it into a piece of visual art. Like, there's even a fixed axle yo-yo can do beautiful things in the hand of the right person. Just look at Haponic stuff. Or you hand it to a beginner and it's like, what's going on? Why are you tying knots with that thing that I spent 10 hours making? So it's, and I honestly think that any yo-yo can be the best yo-yo out there, depending on who's holding it. Like, you hand a beginner violin to a master and they can play a beautiful piece, and you hand a masterful violin to a beginner and it's going to sound like trash. It's just kind of how it works with this hobby. It's almost musically, it's almost comparable to music than it is comparable to like flying a drone, where if you spend the right amount of money, you can buy the drone that you press a button and it launches itself and hovers. But you can't really do that with a yo-yo. Like, you can't buy a yo-yo that's going to do the trick for you. You still have to get the skill.
Oh, here's a big one. Jules Bosman asks, why do you yo-yo?
That changes a lot. Sometimes it's the only thing that has been consistent in my life for a long time. I'll take a slight segue here because someone might be able to pick it from some of my answers here and there. I've been battling depression since I was in my mid-teens, and yo-yoing has been a therapy for me. And so you might have picked someone might have picked that from some of my answers throughout the interview. But yo-yoing has been a way for me to feel like I'm doing something meaningful, whether it's getting featured in a newspaper because of this hobby that I've spent thousands and thousands of hours in. Maybe it's because somebody sees me yo-yoing and invites me to come and do a demonstration to their 5th grade class, and I get an opportunity to see some smiles on kids' faces and see the wonder in their eyes that I knew I had when I was their ages watching other professional yo-yoers yo-yo. Some of it's the ego boost I get when I put a video out and people give me compliments in the comments. Some of it's making the yo-yos by hand and getting grounded by it and feeling like I'm actually here. And like making the wooden yo-yos, it makes me feel connected to earth a little bit. Even though I had to quote unquote destroy a tree to make it happen, it's until I grabbed that piece of wood and formed it into this shape, it was just potential, and now it's a thing. And like, I get from day to day, hour to hour, my reason for yo-yoing changes. And I don't know if it's that way for everyone or if I'm just this crazy person that is always bouncing around from thought to thought, and I definitely function that way. But it changes all the time, and I think that is why I've always, I don't see myself quitting yo-yoing because of that, because there's always something interesting, there's always something new. Like, the fact that fixie stuff came back, like, that's supposed to be a dead leg of history in this niche, and Ed sat down for hours and hours and brought it back to life. Like, I'll save that for another time, but I have a whole interesting thought on that too.
You can go into it now. I'm totally cool with that.
Okay. Well, so I like to imagine a world where ball bearings were never introduced, and I see Ed being the average yo-yoer in that world, like everybody doing kick flips and stalls and really long fixed axle tricks, and like he is an example of what the world would have been like if nobody ever put ball bearings in a yo-yo. And the reason I'm so excited about making them and seeing everybody picking up fixed axle yo-yos is it's very possible for that to become the dominant part of our industry. Like, anybody can pick up a fixed axle yo-yo and within a few minutes learn a couple of tricks or throw a sleeper or do a throwdown. But not everybody on the planet can pick up a ball bearing yo-yo and throw it and want to keep on yo-yoing, because when you throw it down and it doesn't come back, that can be extremely frustrating for a beginner, and that usually makes people quit. So there's so much potential in, if I grab this fixed axle yo-yo and I do a kick flip suicide, or I do some really intricate stall or crazy trick like Ed does, and then I hand it to a beginner and they put it on their hand, they can throw it down, make it come back, they can make it sleep, they can make it walk the dog, but they know that this was just on the hand of somebody that can make it do insane things, then it's like, it makes them think, I could do that too. If I just practice long enough, I could do that too. Like, so that's kind of like this crazy thought that I have in my head about that.
No, I think you're right. There's a certain accessibility to it that the, the common ball bearing, not unresponsive yo-yo doesn't have now. I think you're totally right.
I think that's why kendama is so big, because anybody can grab it and play it, and not everybody can be good at it on their first day, but you can see the people that have played it for 5 years that are doing amazing things with it. Like, that fixed axle yo-yo could very easily be that.
That's getting bigger again too, isn't it? Instagram is bringing the kendama back in a big way.
Yeah, it is. Those, like, even people with small followings in the kendama industry get an insane amount of views and likes on their content when they post it. So it's like, it's definitely, if not bigger than yo-yoing, has a much more active group of participants than yo-yoing.
Yeah, maybe it's something like the exotic nature of it. Like, it's not like for the yo-yo, I guess many people had one or touched one or know what it is, but when people think of kendama, it's like, oh, that's from Japan. Oh, that's kind of exotic and different. I don't know what it is.
Well, it'll definitely be interesting to analyze and see if we could use it to make our industry better.
There you go. See here, we've got one more from Blamin, who asks, and this may be, I was wondering the same thing too. So, have you ever gotten any splinters for making all these wooden yo-yos?
So, I did, and it was really stupid because I was rushing to get a run completed because I was taking way too long to get it done. And the way that I take the blanks, basically the piece of wood that I cut with the hole saw, and I attach them to the lathe, is I have this very long piece of threaded rod that I put in the chuck, and to hold the blank on there, I just thread it into the hole that the hole saw left in the center. And I was in a hurry, and I was like, you know what, I bet I could turn the lathe on at a low RPM, and I could just hold the blank up to it and it'll spin itself on, and then I just need to shut it off when it's getting close and I can crank it on the rest of the way. And I was trying to like turn on some YouTube video or something while I was holding it, and suddenly it reached the end of the hole in the yo-yo and grabbed on and spun the blank in my hand and just embedded a whole bunch of splinters like between my thumb and my index finger. And it was one of those totally avoidable mistakes that immediately after it happens, you're like, I am such an idiot. What the heck am I doing right now? Like, I know I'm in a hurry. I know I need to get this done, but if I hurt myself, there's no way I can get it done. So yeah, that's the only time I've gotten splinters from it. As far as like the actual yo-yos go themselves, I sand them up to like 500 grit or 400 grit. I can't really remember offhand, but I sand them to a point where they feel super smooth. And if any of them ever have rough spots, I go back and sand them again, because I would hate it if, heck, I hate it when I get a splinter. I couldn't imagine if somebody who paid money for something got a splinter from it. That would be the end of that product for them. So yeah, I never want anyone to go through that from something I make, and I don't want to go through it again after having done it in the manufacturing process after spending so many hours making it. So
Right.
it has happened. It was stupid. I regret it. I won't do that again.
And I can attest to that, folks, that I'm holding it. I'm holding your roots right now, and it's just as smooth as butter, really. Like every angle of it. And I wasn't sure at first. Like I said, I'd never held a modern wooden yo-yo, and I wasn't sure what to expect about the feel. And it feels fantastic.
Yeah, these ones. I'm really tempted to switch to a different type of wood from oak, just because oak tends to have pores in it. Like you can see on the face of it that it has these interesting grooves and bumps that kind of like go into the side of the yo-yo, and it's smooth, but you can also see that there's not smooth areas where there was pores that went through the grain of the wood. And I think it looks cool, and if I clear coated them or sealed them somehow, it wouldn't matter. But because of those pores, I've been tempted to change. But the logo for the Burgeon company is an acorn. Like it's a cursive line that forms an acorn and then a yo-yo underneath.
Right.
And because acorns grow into oaks, it's really hard for me to want to switch. But maybe I need to get over myself and just do it for the quality.
It's the theme, though.
Yeah.
But yeah, actually, that's a question I just out of nowhere I was thinking of. If you could use, cost, forgetting about, prohibitive cost or whatever, if you could use any wood, exotic or not, to make the wooden yo-yos, what would you like to use?
I would immediately jump to ebony. I really want to make some out of ebony, but I'm also slightly worried because it's so dark that you can't really see the grain, and I'm worried that it would just look like I used Delrin. And so I don't know, and it's so hard to come by. Like the searching on Amazon, on eBay, and local wood supply shops, I can't find enough where it's like if there was demand for it and I wanted it to be like the official, even just the official type of wood I use for the ball bearing wood yo-yo, what if I can't find enough? And then I'm stuck waiting until another batch of it shows up from Africa. So it's hard for me to want to do it. Maybe I could do like a limited run. But once I find some, I'm going to order it in and borrow my dad's table saw and split it down into some smaller boards and make a few yo-yos out of it. Probably a ball bearing one, but that's what I want to try. I don't know if it would work or not, but I've known of a wood type called mesquite that I learned of from watching Mythbusters, and they were talking about how it was 8 times as dense as, I think, oak or pine or something like that. And they shot it in half with a with a very powerful gun. And I was like, if it's 8 times as dense, it must be pretty heavy. I bet you could make some interesting yo-yos out of it. But it looks so gnarly that I don't know if it has a solid enough piece that you could make a yo-yo out of it, or if it's just, if you cut it up, if it would end up being just chunks here and there. So if you can get mesquite boards, I'd like to try that, just because it's always been in the back of my mind. But ebony will be the first exotic I try in lieu of that.
All right. Well, I think that's all we've got for our questions here today. But thank you so much for joining me. It was a total blast.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Do I get to say the...
I'm so glad you're the first person who's been ready for it.
Well, it's like I've been listening to him like, this is my chance. I got to jump at it.
Before we get to the sign off, is there anything you want to put into people's brains?
Honestly, I don't have that much I really want to plug or promote. If they listen to this and they want to see what I'm doing with wood burning or making yo-yos, Burgeon Yoyos is our Instagram handle. I do have MikeMonty as an Instagram handle, but I don't really post yo-yo stuff on there anymore. It's mostly just family stuff. So yeah, if they want to see what I'm doing as far as the yo-yo things are concerned, my Instagram, Burgeon Yoyos, is where you would go. And I like I said, I'm gearing up the tutorials again. So if you have any trick requests or tutorial requests, feel free to shoot me an email. It's themikemonty@gmail.com. And anytime I can help people out, and like I said earlier, it gives me a little ego boost. It makes me feel like I matter to make those videos. So I'm always happy to record them.
Cool. All right. Well, yeah, it's time for us to do our sign off. So, are you ready for it?
Absolutely. Hopefully I pronounce it correctly. Is it Sayonara?
That's correct.
Awesome. Well, Sayonara.